Hello, 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 and welcome back to Sikich Live. I'm Mike Tegeter coming to you from the Windy City, Chicago, Illinois. Today we are moving into a cybersecurity topic all about prioritizing enterprise risks using data normalization. But before I bring out our guest today and dive into this topic, I want to make sure everyone knows don't be shy on Sikich Live. That's why we come here each week, so that we can come to you with questions and answers on all of our social media platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you haven't heard of Sikich before, we are an accounting, advisory, and technology digital consultancy helping to digitally transform the world that we all work in. So don't forget to like and subscribe so that you can see us each week, Thursdays at 2:30 Central Time, where we discuss Sikich specialty areas like business applications, modern workplace, including ERP and CRM, managed services, cybersecurity, like we're talking about today, IT infrastructure support, and so much more. Well, another thanks for today is to Ken Squires for being here with us and answering some questions about cybersecurity. We're really glad you could be here, Ken. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Mike.
Excellent. Well, Ken, let's just dive right into it. I think that's what the people want. First question, as I say that long title, prioritizing enterprise risks using data normalization. I love it, but what the heck is data normalization?
So yeah, the kind of short answer is data normalization is taking 2 to 3 data sets, whether they're in databases or reports, and kind of combining those data sets into one streamlined database. Whether it's removing duplicate entries or creating kind of a common scale within those data sets, and just kind of streamlining and making the two or three different data sets efficient. A lot of times that could be within like websites and that. If you have one database that you're calling to instead of multiple databases, you could improve latency between web calls and that. So it's really making the data efficient, making it more relevant, and kind of combining data sets together.
Great. And so I have 2 questions here on this next one. The question is, how does it relate to enterprise risk management? But before you answer that, when we talk about enterprise, what does that really mean? Who are we really talking to when we say enterprise?
Yeah, a lot of times when we look at enterprise risk, we're not just looking at cyber risks, we're also looking at operation and regulatory risk or legal risk. So it's kind of as an enterprise, you're trying to combine all that together to, with like the title of what this, meeting is today for, is how do we prioritize all that across the enterprise? So you have different business objectives when it comes to your operations on the floor to protection for cybersecurity, and the balance those is what we're looking at to use data normalization with.
And so that's how it kind of all relates to enterprise risk management.
Correct. Yeah. So we're enterprise, all the risk rolls up to upper management, maybe a board or an enterprise risk manager. And they're across the whole organization to say, hey, we have a particular operational risk with we also might have the cyber risk of ransomware. How do we balance the two there? And did I get cut off there for a little bit?
No, I'm not sure what happened. It might have been on my end, but I heard you and then I didn't hear you, but all good. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, I think both of us set up there. So real quick, just to recap that, it's kind of taking that operational risk where maybe we might be able to not fulfill an order on the production floor, with also on this side where we have a cyber risk of ransomware. And how does that roll up to the enterprise, and how do they prioritize preventing those two risks?
So why is it hard to prioritize remediation efforts from the outcome of multiple assessments?
Because a lot of times within these different multiple assessments, the assessors or the firm or internally, we're using different measures or different scales. Some of the assessments might take into revenue, impact to revenue. Others might take into, a high, medium, or risk score, or SLAs. And it was, taking the different reports and then trying to prioritize that when they're using different measures to calculate risk. It's hard to prioritize a revenue impact over an SLA impact. And so what we want to do is somehow come up to a common scale that we're assessing all the different findings across the organization.
So how does data normalization help prioritize and align those remediation efforts that we're talking about according to the organization's business objectives or their obligations?
Yeah, and that's really where an organization should start, right? They should start defining their kind of business objectives and collecting what obligations they have, whether it's regulatory or legal or contractual obligations, or possibly even board or investor obligations, and putting those business objectives and obligations down into a risk criteria and risk acceptance process where we're developing our common scale, and we're going to use that common scale as a kind of a process to evaluate all the inputs from all the different assessments across the organization. You might have findings from an internal audit or an external partner doing an external audit, or maybe a financial audit and or a cyber risk assessment. What we're going to do is we're going to take those different data sets, right, which have different scales, and then run them through the enterprise risk management criteria that you would define, knowing how that impacts your business objectives and obligations. And really, it standardizes those different reports to one format. And that format is how the findings or the risk impact your objectives and your obligations, not what the auditors have said, the external auditors or cybersecurity, the industry has said. It's what actually impacts you and what's the riskiest to your organization.
Right. Every organization is so different in the risks that they take
Exactly.
in, and so understanding those objectives first and foremost at the ground level is absolutely the best way to go.
Right. The
So
difference of kind of real quick here, the difference of protecting
yeah,
patient care over credit cards numbers and that credit card data is different.
right.
So the control needs to be prioritized different. And if your objectives are to protect healthcare, then we would look at the findings from these different audits different than we would if it was to protect credit card data.
Sure, absolutely. So how can can't speak today. How can remediation efforts be organized and tracked?
Yeah, so it's always great to have an enterprise risk register, really. A lot of times these audits or these risk assessments are coming in PDF formats or Word doc or maybe on a PowerPoint presentation. And if you really don't have a enterprise risk register, whether that's a solution or spreadsheets, we've been using spreadsheets for years and those are still effective. It's about correlating and collecting all the different findings into one unified format. And that's really with a risk register. And in that risk register, your risk register, not the firm that you're working with to do the external audit or another internal assessment, kind of like the organization's enterprise risk register, you're going to have that criteria. You're going to have what you've said as likelihoods, and you're going to have what you've put as impacts to your business objectives and impacts to your obligations. And you're going to use your criteria to do that likelihood times impact to come up with that risk calculation. And really how that risk calculation comes out is how you're going to look at prioritizing the remediation efforts. So, whether that's a revenue hit here that said there was going to be a 2% loss in revenue on this report if we don't put in a second router, so we don't have, redundancy there in our underwriting department, and we could get a 2% loss in revenue if we don't have that redundancy, to correlating it to here where we might not be able to fill our business partner's SLA objective of 4 hours because we don't have a second print digital printer. So those are two different risk And as we run that through the enterprise risk criteria in the risk register, they'll come out on different orders of prioritization according to the risk level.
So what are some techniques that can be used to normalize risk data?
Yeah, even going through and doing kind of research on this topic, and I've been studying it for a while. We work with attorney generals and that, and setting what's reasonable risk, and coming up with kind of calculations how to determine, how to prioritize risk. And the one kind of a simple way that do this, when you look at data normalization, there's multiple different kind of methods that are out there and techniques. But a simple one, just for this kind of presentation, is called a mid-max data normalization. It's really taking all the different variables and putting them in a score between 0 and 1. And so you can imagine there's a risk scale between 1 and 25, and somebody else is using a maturity model of 1 to 5. If you could, the 1 to 5 on that is the minimum is 1 and the max is 5. And on the other one, the minimum is 1 and the max is 25. And if you, with data normalization, min-maxing, what you're doing is trying to get all the findings in each one of those data sets down to a 0 and a 1. It's very simple math. You can kind of look it up there, but it's just taking the max of each one and making the minimum of 0 and the max of 1, and going through the kind of the math calculations. That's one technique, and that's the math way. And kind of when I usually give this presentation, I say this is not a math class, and you can kind of look up different data normalization techniques to kind of do that, but that's what you're trying to do, is put everything in a common scale. The other way is a manual method, where you're looking at what you've defined for your likelihoods and your impact, and you're just reassessing the outputs from all these other reports. If you have a subject matter expert within your organization that could take your criteria and do a reassessment according to your criteria. So you have the math kind of data normalization. You can look up the kind of 5 different techniques there, or you have the kind of manual subject matter expert technique that you could use.
Sure. So another question for you. So the remediation efforts, data normalization, all of this is kind of it's a good chunk of work to do with it. Is there usually a person at a company that handle these types of things, or are there cybersecurity services, for instance, at Sikich, that could help with this?
Yeah, a lot of times it's kind of a missed skill set within a lot of organizations on the
Right.
prioritization. Right now, what we see and we go to, especially from the IT side, IT is used to implementing and support, right? Now with all these new privacy laws and compliance laws and vendor assessments from their partners, security questionnaires, it's really been a burden on IT departments, because they're trying to implement solutions that different departments need, different applications, and then support those solutions they implement. And having that kind of compliance officer or risk manager, usually kind of from a financial standpoint, it's the CFO kind of managing those partners. But when it
Right.
comes to cyber risk or IT risk, and then kind of combining that, it's really nice to have a partner like Sikich that kind of, that has the expertise both on the financial side and on the IT side, where we're helping our financial clients kind of show where cyber risk, how does that impact their business. So, like I said with the example that I gave with the router, right? That looks like an IT thing. Why are we investing $50,000 in a router? The reason is because it impacts underwriting.
Right.
And we have an obligation to process, and a business objective to process, I don't know, 150 loan applications a day.
Mm-hmm.
And if this router was to go down for 16 hours because we don't have a backup, now we've impacted underwriting. And that's a
Right.
business objective.
And that's where the
So
2% revenue comes from. Yeah, got it.
yeah, and that's just really the difference with working with, an accounting firm that does financial auditing, that we have the cybersecurity to kind of bridge that two together with this enterprise risk management.
Sure. Okay. No, yeah. Thank you so much for answering my questions here. I don't have any more for you. Um, Interesting stuff, and of course, like we said, this is something that Sikich does and specializes in. If you're interested, please feel free to reach out. I know Ken, myself, would be happy to speak with you on LinkedIn. You can email us info@sikich.com or visit www.sikich.com. happy to. Just make sure to put Sikich Live in the subject line of info@sikich.com if you're interested in that, so we know where you're coming from. Ken, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it. Hope to have you back on Sikich Live soon. And remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see everybody next Thursday. Bye.